If I take a whole bottle of 500 aspirin tablets all at once, that will kill me. The linear no threshold principle says if 500 people each take one aspirin tablet, one of them is likely to die because of it. Now, that's just insane.
Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Easley inContext, and we have a familiar friend of the program, Dr. Cal Beisner. He's been on many, many times with the Cornwall Alliance, and I won't take any time to read his bio or vita because you can do that in the show notes, and he's a longtime friend, and we're so glad to have you back. Thanks for agreeing to come back on the podcast, Cal.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Michael. It's always fun. I always enjoy talking with you. We usually go astray of our plans, which
That's
is all
always
the more
good,
fun.
Though. That's all the more fun. Cornwall Alliance is coming up on 20 years. You're not that old, are you, Cal?
Well, let's see. Add another 50 to that, and you're approximately my age.
Getting pretty close. Yeah, it happens, doesn't it? It happens.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea when you started kicking this around that this would be not just full-time, but globally influencing?
Yep. Literally, the first email that led to all of this was done on August 31 of 2005. So that will be our most technical anniversary. It took a couple of years after that. Within a few months, we actually had an organization going, but it wasn't incorporated or anything. It was very loose-knit, and it stayed loose-knit over about the next 2 years. Then we teamed up with another nonprofit to incorporate and went that way for about the next 10 years. And 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we went independent with our own nonprofit. So it's been 20 years.
So for folks that maybe don't know the Cornwall Alliance of Stewardship of Creation, give us the overview, the 25-word vision, purpose of the ministry. Yeah,
we're trying to save the planet from the people who are trying to save the planet. That's the shortest version. We're a think tank of just under 70 evangelical scholars, scientists, economists, theologians, dedicated to educating the public and policymakers on biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the poor, and the Christian worldview, theology, and ethics that underlie that and provide the basis for the gospel of Jesus Christ, our salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone.
Where did this fight begin, if you will, with the governments and the new Green New Deal kind of is the acronym we've heard about the last several years. Where did this begin? The climate change and the fear of it, and the glaciers are melting, the oceans are evaporating, etc.
Yeah. Well, it depends on how deep you want to go in terms of worldview and how that affects all this. I mean, it really all goes back to the Garden of Eden. Has God said, right? Has God really said? So let me connect that in a quick and simple way. Has God really said of his whole creation, behold, it was very good? Or is Earth's climate system so incredibly fragile that by increasing carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere from 28 thousandths of 1%, that's 28 thousandths of 1%, to the current 43 thousandths of 1%, we are going to cause climate catastrophe that maybe even is going to wipe out the human race or maybe wipe out all life on Earth. I mean, believe it or not, some people are saying both of those things. Now, if that's the way the climate system is, then I wouldn't expect God to have said of it, behold, it's very good. But he said that about his entire creation. So, I mean, there we go. There's a deep dive into how some worldview things affect this.
All creation groans. All creation groans, though, Cal.
Yeah, it does, because of our sin and the curse God put on the earth. Right. But that doesn't mean that everything has now suddenly become so utterly fragile that the tiniest little perturbation can cause it to go into catastrophe. We know that partly because, despite the fact that God cursed the ground, and despite the fact that he miraculously sent a flood on the earth that did kill all breathing life, other than Adam and his family and the animals that he had on the ark, right? All air-breathing life. Despite that, God also said, following that flood, that as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, summer and winter, cold and heat, night and day, will not cease. That was God's covenant with himself. We read that at the end of Genesis chapter 8. He himself promises to sustain all the cycles on which life depends in the earth. So I think put that together with Genesis 1:31, all that he made was very good. And you don't have room for this catastrophist notion about tiny causes resulting in just incredibly huge effects. It really just doesn't make sense. And by the way, our natural studies, our studies of nature, indicate that that is exactly right. I'm forgetting now the technical name of the principle, but there is a principle that says any system in nature that is in equilibrium or close to equilibrium, if it is suddenly shocked out of equilibrium, naturally tends to go back into it. That tells us that so-called negative feedback mechanisms, I'll explain that in a moment, outweigh positive feedback mechanism. A feedback mechanism comes into play, you affect a system with something brought in from the outside, and it kind of knocks things askew for a moment. Well, various things inside that system might either magnify or minimize the initial perturbation, right? If they magnify their positive feedback, if they minimize their negative feedback. Well, this basic principle, the name of which I've forgotten, it's a French name, this basic principle tells us that all the natural systems we've studied are dominated by negative rather than positive feedback mechanisms, and that's why they don't all just wander off into utter chaos when you bump them a little bit. So that's itself a display of God's wisdom in designing the climate system. And by the way, our online course, we've started an online course called Basic Climate Science, winds up, and it's taught by a former professor of climatology, winds up after teaching you all about how the climate works. It winds up showing how all of that reflects the wisdom, the magnificence of God, its designer, creator, and sustainer.
And we will have many show notes available because this is a 20th anniversary of the Cornwall Alliance, and that's one of the first ones we'll talk about with David Gates. You mentioned a couple of things. I was thinking of the Great Thompson Flood and Mount Hood. Yeah. I remember watching a video, I think it was from either Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis or I forget, but they showed what happened in Mount Hood and had the devastation. And in less than like 70, was it?
You mean St. Helens? St. Helens?
Forgive me, St. Helens.
Right.
And within 7 years, it was glorious what was taking place. And the same thing with the Great Thompson Flood. If you've ever gone up Trail Ridge Road in Colorado and you drive up to the top and you look down on the alluvial fan where it broke through, it's magnificent how it recovered. Yeah. And yet we were told these things would be the end of the world as we know it. The other one that's interesting, I think you pointed this out to me, was Chernobyl. There's some kind of unique purple fungus that's growing now?
Yeah. I didn't refer to a purple fungus at Chernobyl itself. Apparently, is that in the
there's something happening there.
Itself?
There's something growing there now that's actually accommodated this nuclear waste.
Well,
it's like the bacteria that can eat petroleum,
Yeah. Well, here's one that maybe we don't want to have too many people know about, but I'll mention it anyway. Marijuana is a bioaccumulating plant. It means it picks up all kinds of things from the soil in which it grows, and it stores them in its stems and leaves. Among those are actually radioactive waste kind of things. So, following Chernobyl,
We can
The
grow pot
Soviets
in
planted a bunch
Chernobyl.
of marijuana all around that area.
Timothy
to
Leary
help.
would like this.
Yeah, right.
Radioactive
But I mean,
marijuana.
God has provided his world with all kinds of natural cleanup things, and it's just truly wonderful. Doesn't mean that we can't do harm, and we do need to be
Right.
careful.
Right.
But it's also really easy to exaggerate the dangers of various different
Well,
emissions.
I remember one of the first times you and David Legates and I had a conversation about CO2. And before I could finish the question, David said, it's the elixir of the environment.
Yeah, the elixir of life, indeed,
Yeah.
of all life. I mean, every plant requires CO2 for photosynthesis, and all the rest of life on Earth depends on plants one way or another. So all of us depend on that. Well, the more CO2 there is in the atmosphere, the better plants photosynthesize, which means more food for everything that eats plants or that eats something that does eat plants. It also means that plants expand their growing range into warmer and cooler places and to higher and lower places. They make better use of soil nutrients. They can grow better in either warmer or colder temperatures and in either wetter or drier soils. So again, they expand their range, and that means there's less pressure on all the different animals that depend on those plants. So if you're worried about the so-called sixth great extinction, which, by the way, is a myth, but if you're worried about that, you should be really glad there's more CO2 going into the atmosphere because it relieves pressure on animals that are having some trouble staying alive.
Again, anecdotally, we talked about, how the God's creation can accommodate a lot of our messes. I have a lot of houseplants. I love houseplants. My wife could care less. She likes them. She doesn't want to take care of them. She goes, when you die, they're gone. They're going to die too. But anyway, I read something and followed this guy and I think he was in the Philippines, and he's done studies on houses in the Philippines that are in India that are heavily polluted, and he's got it down to a metric. X number of houseplants in your home will detoxify better than these HEPA air cleaners. It's like,
that's great. That's great.
God made a wonderful tool, didn't he?
Amen. Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. You talk about this. Let's talk a little bit more about the basic climate science, because you're getting into some school systems now with this curriculum, correct?
Yeah. Well, we're working at it. At this point, the curriculum is entirely free online. It's an online course. People move through one episode, one lesson at a time. And it is at a level that could go for credit, either at a very high school level or a college level. So basically, students who want to take this can go to their profs, to their teachers and say, hey, will you give me credit for my taking this course? And we'll see how that goes. We'll also be looking for opportunities to get this actually into the catalogs of various Christian schools and whatnot.
Well, this would be a great shout out to Christian universities and classical training, because they all have a percentage of independent studies. And,
Right.
If you're in
Perfect for
AP
that.
classes and whatnot, you can do an independent study, and it'd be great. You could do it on your own schedule, on your own time. One of the things that you've talked about recently, and of course, everything's new with this new administration, with the DOE and the EPA, what they're doing with the environment. It's tectonic how quickly some of these policies are
really
changing.
is.
So kind of walk through some that maybe the public they're aware of, and maybe some that are important that we're not aware of.
Well, maybe we'll get at the takeaway, the good news first. The good news is the public is not going to be saddled with electric vehicle mandates, with wind and solar mandates, with wind and solar subsidies and all of that sort of thing that we've had for the last, going on 20 years, going on as long as Cornwall Alliance has been around. Two particular specifics on this. And they both came out on July 29. The federal EPA released a proposed rule change. At this point, it's still proposed. It has to go through the period of public comment, after which the actual decision will be made, but I'm pretty sure that it will be made, to eliminate what's called the carbon dioxide endangerment finding. That was issued by the EPA under President Obama in 2009, and it declared CO2 to be a pollutant according to the Clean Air Act. That was a revolutionary notion because the Clean Air Act had specifically said this was to be about specific pollutants that damage human health because of the human interaction with them directly. CO2 doesn't do that. CO2 is not dangerous to human health until you get to around about 30,000 parts per million, and then only over a long period of time. Well, we've only got 43 parts per million in the atmosphere as a whole already. So we're nowhere near that. So that was a revolutionary action by the EPA in 2009. And the new EPA is saying we propose eliminating that endangerment finding. That would eliminate EPA's lawful regulation of CO2 emissions from vehicles, from power plants, all sorts of things. Absolutely fabulous, greatly reducing the cost of transportation, of energy, and so on. The other specific is that the Department of Energy just released on the same day a report on the actual impact of added CO2 in the atmosphere on climate and through climate on the US economy, the health and welfare of American people. Yeah, there is a tiny impact of that CO2 on the economy and on people's well-being, right? But it is way, way, way overshadowed by the positive impact of all the energy that we get from fossil fuels and of all the added plant growth that we get because of the added CO2 in the atmosphere. So what that means is that once you do the cost-benefit analysis, the added CO2 in the atmosphere is actually an improvement, not a problem to us. And so again, there's no reason to regulate that. These two things together, when they're fully implemented, are going to save Americans hundreds of billions of dollars per year, trillions of dollars over coming decades. And here's part of why I'm so much in favor of this. It's that I'm concerned far more about the poor in other countries. You know, Americans are so rich, even our so-called poor. This is an inconvenience, maybe even a big one, but it doesn't threaten our lives. But for poor people in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia and Latin America, you increase their cost of energy from fossil fuels or something like that by 5 or 10%, and it can make the difference between life and death. And as America provides the lead, more and more of those countries are going to be ready to thumb their noses at the UN climate folks and say, no, we're not doing that. We are going to lift our people out of poverty, and that's far more important.
Well, and we've talked many times about China and India being the greatest problem from a pollution standpoint. Forget CO2 emissions and fossil fuel emissions, just the nature of there's no afterburners, there's no type of any restrictions, catalytic converters, which are good things, right? There's no controls whatsoever in India and China. They're the largest populations and the largest pollutants.
Right. And the reason they don't use those controls so much right now is those controls are expensive. So the wealthier they get, the sooner they start using those controls. This is a basic principle in environmental economics called the environmental transition or the environmental Kuznets curve. Early industrialization, pollution rises. But the benefits of the industrialization far outweigh the pollution, which is shown because life expectancy rises at the very same time and health increases at the very same time. Disease rates diminish. So that's really good. But once you reach certain levels of economic development, then people are able to spend to reduce the pollution. And for every different pollutant, at various different times, depending on the country and the time, what decade and so on, you reach a peak in the pollution and then it declines, and pretty soon it's lower than it was before the Industrial Revolution or the industrial transition, right? So India and China, God bless them for putting all that CO2 in the atmosphere. We all need it, right? But they are indeed polluting their own folks with all kinds of really bad stuff that is fairly local, right? It doesn't affect people very much anywhere but there. They will apply the controls on those emissions faster the sooner they rise economically. And that's a good thing to see.
You and I remember during COVID, they had these pictures of India with blue skies. And, in these popular, they had not seen a blue sky in a decade. But when everything was shut down, the lack of all the motorbikes and whatnot. Anyway, I digress. Let me ask you this. We've not talked about this. What are the bad pollutants that the West is currently producing in your estimation?
Well, I just happened to read an article today in Washington Examiner about the fact that mifepristone and whatever is the other abortion drug, the drug that causes abortions, those pass into the water. They are not filtered out by water plants. And consequently, they get into plants, they get into animals, they can get into people, and they may affect people who don't even want them. Now, the environmentalists, they don't care about that at all. Why not? Because after all, they want to reduce human population. So if that causes sterility, and there are, for instance, the pill, the drug to regulate women's cycles, that also goes into our water supply. That may be affecting fertility and the decline in fertility rates. So there's some, but of course there's sulfur dioxides, there's carbon monoxide, there's lead, there's ozone, and
where's the lead coming from, Cal? Where's the lead coming from?
Well, some lead actually comes just from fairly natural sources, but even though we've taken all the lead out of our fuel for vehicles, right? And lead, the what's called the ambient concentration of lead in America's atmospheres has dropped by way more than 99% since the 1970s, which means basically there's nothing left to worry about there.
Okay.
But some water systems still use lead pipes, systems that were built long ago.
Older systems,
And so some of that lead will leach out into the water that people drink from their homes. By the way, the risk from that is also grossly exaggerated.
Minuscule,
We have a major paper on our website that deals somewhat with that as well, discussing the amount of risk from lead exposure, and it's much smaller than most people think.
Back to the water for a minute. I remember a few years ago talking to a pharmacologist friend of mine, and he went down the serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Prozac and other ones, the contraceptions, and there was a third category that were in the water system, and that was before the so-called abortion pill was available in the way it is today. And I never thought about any of that. And he goes, "It's all in the water." And what years ago, Cindy and I got a whole house water filtration system, and that was not just one of the many reasons we did. Anyway,
of course, well, the concentration of that stuff in what we get out of our faucets at home is thousands of times smaller than the concentration when you take the pill.
Exactly. I mean, patients with fentanyl patches who come home with cancer and cardiac issues, and where your days are really limited, and they give you these fentanyl patches, and they have a disposal process, and they say flush it down the toilet.
Right.
That's probably not the best way.
Let me point out another little hypocrisy for the green movement here. Almost all of the environmentalists operate with what they call a linear no threshold principle of toxicity, meaning it doesn't matter how low the concentration, how low the exposure to a pollutant, it's always net dangerous. It's
End of the
always
world.
a harm, and getting it lower will always be good, no matter what it costs. I mean, now here's how silly that is. If I take a whole bottle of 500 aspirin tablets all at once,
That's
that will
bad.
kill me. The linear no threshold principle says if 500 people each take one aspirin tablet, one of them is likely to die because of it. Now, that's just insane. The reality is that there is a threshold below which any given toxin is no longer a significant risk. And if the environmentalists really believe the linear no threshold principle, then they should be really upset about all these various chemicals getting into our water that are the chemicals they like in medications to control population.
What about waste? What about plastic bottles and other things we're consuming and throwing in the landfills?
First off, I mean, there's an enormous amount of land out there, and we can dig down and bury enormous amounts of waste. We're not in danger of suddenly, getting covered up by it. But that doesn't mean we should just be using all that space for landfills and things like that. So I'm a big believer in recycling everything that we can recycle. People who grew up in the Great Depression, they had a saying, use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do it out, right? So I think that was real wisdom. And that was my parents' wisdom, right?
Yes, mine too.
So we should be looking for more and more ways to recycle things. Many plastics can be recycled. And frankly, this is one of the reasons I so love engineers. And so I also so wish that more and more Christian young people, if they're going to go to college, if they're going to pursue something in STEM, I wish they would go into engineering. Because in engineering, you're looking for ways to solve problems, right? So we need more engineers to look at more ways to reuse things that at this time are not economically rewarding
Scalable,
to recycle, and most plastics are not. But we can be doing the research to find out how to make more and more plastics recyclable.
Well, and you see some of these high school kids not going to college that decided to clean up parts of the ocean, and there's a couple of these young kids who they're making a lot of money. They're recycling plastic water bottles, making beachwear out of them and whatnot. I mean, it's just, you love the creativity. And somebody had to engineer that process from taking that bottle and converting it into some other form of polyester. What are some other things that you're encouraged about with the new administration and we've talked about EV windmills. Cindy and I last year did a wonderful cruise up from the UK up to Scotland and Iceland. The number of wind farms in the ocean blew my mind. I mean, you're out there, in the middle of the ocean, and there are these massive wind farms in the ocean. And I was talking to one of the crew, and they said, it's just destroyed just the view. And of course, now they're talking about, is it positive or negative with sea life and so forth and so on. But what are some other things with the new administration and what they're doing that you're excited about?
Yeah, once upon a time, environmentalists cared about whether the world around them was beautiful.
The tuna was caught in the net,
Right, yeah. Or the tuna caught in the net, or the right whale that loses its
dolphins,
navigation capacities because of the vibrations from the wind turbines in the ocean, right? And therefore winds up beached up and dies. Yeah, once upon a time they cared about that. The Trump administration, I'm glad to say, has taken steps to prevent the approval of new. I don't call them wind farms. They're not farms. On farms you grow plants and animals. They've taken steps to prevent the construction of new wind factories offshore for a variety of different reasons. I mean, the sonar testing, the blasting, and everything else that goes into locating and implanting the bases for these things and all of that. Those greatly disturb the navigation systems of whales, porpoises, all sorts of other things. And then, too, once you've got them built, they have to have lines from there to the land, and those lines interfere with fish and lobsters, crustaceans, all of the different creatures in the sea, and they interfere with fishing nets of commercial fishers. So it's a big problem, and I'm glad to see that the Trump administration is working against that. But it's not only for those reasons. It's also because the more wind and solar we hook into our grids, the less reliable the grids become, because it's not always windy and it's not always sunny, right? And the more expensive the electricity from those grids becomes, because it's more expensive to generate electricity from wind and solar than it is from coal, oil, natural gas, or nuclear. They'll say that the combined cost of generating electricity from wind or solar now is in some instances less than the cost of generating it from coal or natural gas.
Right, right.
That's only if you leave out of that calculation all the cost of having to keep coal or natural gas generating stations running on spinning reserve as backup for when the wind stops and the sun doesn't shine. Well, you wouldn't have to do that if you didn't have all that wind and solar. And the more wind and solar you get, the higher the proportional cost is. So once you add those in and add in the cost of the subsidies that the federal government gives to wind and solar, which it does not give to coal, oil, natural gas, suddenly those prices, generation prices, exceed the prices of coal, oil, and natural gas.
Well, and as we talked before, the turbines and the solar panels are terrible pollutants. When you have to get rid of them and replace them, they're impossible to deal with.
Yeah. And because you have to mine an enormous amount of earth to get all the rare earth minerals necessary to build those turbines and solar arrays.
Yeah.
Far more earth has to be moved for those than for mining
fracking,
coal
per
gigawatt hour of electricity that you want to generate. So it's just much better for nature for us to use fossil fuels than it is for us to use wind and solar.
Well, I'm nowhere near the expert or scholar you are in the area, but I love the discussion about the smaller nuclear plants. I think that
those are marvelous.
That would, because our grid, and I think a lot of us are concerned about our grid in the country with AI and with EMPs lurking around the corner from unfriendly people. It wouldn't take much to cause some real havoc over here, and some small nuclear plants strategically around big cities make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I'll just mention here one of the generous donors to the Cornwall Alliance, and I'm not allowed to name him, right? But he has been a member of a national commission studying how to defend against and recover from an electromagnetic pulse. That's a really serious issue. I mean, that could basically put us back into the dark ages overnight.
Yep.
And it could take not weeks, not months, but years to recover.
Yeah.
So defending against that, hardening all of our different grid and all of our electronics and everything else is a huge project. And frankly, the more money we waste on wind and solar, the less we have available to address that project. As Thomas Sowell says, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs.
Yeah. Well, to your point about, I don't like to fear monger, but I've asked friends in the military for a decade now. I said it wouldn't take too many EMPs in the country to immobilize it. And they look at me like, you have no idea how simple that would be. You can fly a balloon over the country and not doing about it. You could drop some EMPs pretty quickly, and it would, you're right. So it's kind of, a lot of people are buying generators.
A friend of mine is a former director of national intelligence, and he told me the same thing.
It's kind of chilling to talk about.
that he's been protecting us.
Well, yeah, and let's not send our people into conspiracy theories. They got enough troubles. Well, the good news is on your 20th anniversary, you've got a generous donor that's come up with $100,000, and it's a matching period through the month of August. So in the show links, you'll find it, or you can just go to your search engine and put in the Cornwall Alliance, and you can go there. Any donation you make during the month of August will be doubled by this generous donor. So I'd encourage you. There's so many organizations that we love and want to support. You know, inContext is one of those people supporting inContext. But I got to tell you, your investment in Cornwall Alliance is good stewardship. They're good stewards of what they're doing, the free programs they offer. You need to spend some time on their website. Cal has hundreds of pamphlets and books. Lots of things are free to download. And if you need any help in your church, in a maybe one of these weekends where they take college students away for a worldview weekend, you need to reach out to the Cornwall Alliance. They'd be happy to help you. Resources, materials, even a speaker. So take a look at it, pray about it. We all can't do everything, but we all can do something. And I would encourage and challenge you to make a gift during the month of August that'll be matched to be a great blessing to the ministry at Cornwall Alliance, and I think for what God's stewardship for our planet is all about. So thanks for your prayer, for your consideration. Cal, it's always a treat to have you. The time goes too quickly, and one of these days we're going to spend some serious time together.
Well, thanks very much, Michael. I look forward to that time. By the way, it would be nice if we had one donor who could pledge the $100,000 match. It was actually 12 donors who pledged various parts of that, but it adds up to that.
For clarity, absolutely.
Yeah. And, praise God, the actor who started St. Jude's Children's Hospital put a plaque on the wall saying, "I'd rather have a dollar gift from each of 1 million people than $1 million from one person." Yeah. And I agree with Danny Thomas about that. We have a lot of smaller donors. We don't have anybody in the $100,000 per gift range. But thank God for those we do have. And thank you so much, Michael, for giving your listeners a chance to get better acquainted with us.
Yeah, they'll do it. God bless you. Until next time, thanks, Cal.